Welcome to Professional Educators of Tennessee's webinar tonight. We're going to talk about collaborative conferencing, answer some frequently asked questions about it, and take questions from the audience. Our presenters tonight are Kathy Cobb. Kathy is the president of PET. She is a seasoned teacher in Clarksville, Montgomery County Schools. And we also have J.C. Bowman, the executive director of PET. So if you wouldn't mind, we're going to go ahead and begin. The first question we get often is, what is PECCA?
All right, who's going to address that, JC, you or me? Well, since you helped craft it, I think you should answer that since you helped craft it.
Yeah, well, PECCA is our state's answer to collective bargaining. PECCA stands for Professional Educators Collaborative Conferencing Act. It was passed in 2011, and it was passed. We were very instrumental because we were very concerned that the folks were sitting at the table in an adversarial role, and we wanted people working together for the benefit of all public schools and public school educators. So that was one of the issues that we felt needed to be addressed. In a perfect world, we would all learn that it's not about management versus employees. It is about working together to save public education so we can have it for the next generation. So,
I think that's interesting because even today, when we voted on November 14th, if we wanted to continue our collaborative conferencing with the school district in Clarksville, Montgomery County, I still had teachers coming up to me asking, now what is this? What are we doing? What is this vote all about? Still not understanding after 3 years what exactly the law involved. So I'm thinking this is an area where we need to educate teachers more. We just need to make sure they understand this is what the law is, this is why it was passed, because you have so many teachers who still don't know what this particular process is.
And yeah, not only that, there's some school systems that have really understood what's trying to be accomplished here, and they've really done a good job. Montgomery County is one of those systems that has done a good job. There's some other ones as well. I can think of Putnam County as another one, and where these folks really understand that it's a collaborative effort to bring everybody and to give voice toward that activity. Collaborative conferencing is the process which local boards of education and our employees get to meet, and as we've worked forward on that. So some systems do it well, some still are real skeptical of it. I think the bottom line is that we recognize that it's going to take a team approach moving forward, and it's a more modern approach to advocacy for the local community.
Well, and then too, I firmly believe in every school system, it all depends on your senior leadership, how much they embrace this. And I think that's why Clarksville Montgomery County has done so well, is because as soon as the law was passed, our senior leadership people, they were in contact with union members, they were in contact with me, they set up trainings for us before this ever began. So they were just very proactive in getting this process started. So, and I think that makes all the difference in the world, knowing that the school system is truly interested in listening to teachers and hear what they have to say.
Yes. Now there's 7 areas that most folks that don't know this, but there's 7 areas that are required to discuss in collaborative conferencing. This is one area that collaborative conferencing is superior to collective bargaining. And this is because in collective bargaining you can only do 2 areas at once. Collaborative conferencing, you can do all 7 areas. So you can talk about salaries and wages, the grievance procedures, insurance, fringe benefits, which they don't include pensions or retirement programs, but working conditions, which I really think is probably the biggest one we face right now. So we need to look at some of those things. Leave is a thing that needs to be discussed, as well as payroll deductions except with respect to the funds that go to political activities. And one of the things that's going to happen this session, for good or bad, and so you're going to want to pay attention to that, is that they're going to make sure that dollars are not being spent on political activities by education groups. And it's not just the union or us. I mean, we spend none of our dollars. We do not support candidates, nor do we endorse candidates. But there's also other entities that have sprung up around public education, and there's other groups that that engage in political activity around the things around the area. So you're seeing some of this. SEIU, for example, is another group that is located in some systems, and some of those groups are using dollars. So it's not just a target at that, but you can expect that to be a high topic area in the legislative session this year. So what else is on the agenda, guys?
Well, that answered one of the questions. Is there a difference between collaborative conferencing and collective bargaining? I think you addressed both the issues that can be discussed as well as the interest-based conversation. How about representation and the rights of educators? How is that different with collaborative conferencing than collective bargaining?
Kathy, you want to take that, or you want me to start?
So go ahead and start, and then I'll jump in.
Okay, well, what happens is this, is in collective bargaining, and this is a good example, and I'll give you an example in New York City. In New York City, collective bargaining was being done by they bargained, 7 groups were able to, they did an election, and so basically about 23% of the people elected one group to represent all groups. Well, quickly the interest of the 6 groups were lost, so only the interest of the one group began, and they started going on strikes, and that's the history of collective bargaining. So I mean, historically, until 1974, the NEA opposed collective bargaining. So they were not a real strong supporter of that. So AFT was the original group that brought collective bargaining to the United States and into the education arena, and starting around 1962. So we've changed a little bit from that in our focus. With collaborative conferencing, where you're able to do collective bargaining, back to this, you elect, so just a simple percentage point more than the other groups. So if you have 4,000 teachers and 2,001 of them choose one group over the other, then that group gets to represent both groups in collective bargaining. With collaborative conferencing, everyone gets a place at the table. You can have, so if another group emerges along with our group, and there's going to need to be some adjustments to how seats are aligned, but basically everybody gets a seat at the table, so you're going to see a fractured type of group. So you might see down the road, you may see science teachers and math teachers and different groups, professional educators at Tennessee, which we represent every group. And so you may do that, and then you'll see the union, and you may see another union. You may see, like in Campbell County, the American Federation of Teachers has a strong presence up there. So there's 3 groups in that community, and all 3 groups would be at the table to discuss their members' interest on those 7 areas that we've identified.
And just speaking from experience in our school system, it was quite interesting when we first started, because there were 6 union members, and there was 1 PET member. And the interesting thing is, even though there were more union representatives there as opposed to my 1, all of us had an equal part in the group. And in the training that we went through before we began the actual process, nothing could be decided upon, no issue, until there was complete agreement with the entire group. So if there was something that I didn't agree with, or that was senior leadership did not agree with, then we stayed and we talked it out until we all came to a consensus of how we were going to answer or solve that issue. So that's quite different from what's happened in the past. And it was quite a learning experience for the union members because they were so used to, okay, we're making a decision, this is what we're doing, and this is the information that we're bringing before the table. So it was quite an adjustment for that group. Not that it wasn't a great group to work with. By the end of the second year, I think we were a well-oiled machine and we did well together. But that first year was definitely a learning experience because they were used to, quite frankly, calling all the shots.
Yeah, that's a good thing. We think that more voices at the table just really strengthens professional. We need to put a unified front on the face because we're really catching from all sides, and we're seeing that, and so I think it's a very important factor that we move forward. A couple school districts still, you see some of the, it's hard for some of the old union members to understand that it's not me versus them mentality. It's us. That's the number one item that we try to sell, and we think putting a forward-thinking vision on collaborative conferencing and collective bargaining for collaborative conferencing side versus collective bargaining. Excuse me, let me back up. Putting a us versus them mentality is no longer accepted. So making sure that everybody understands that it is a togetherness factor is very important for the success of collaborative conferencing, which we want that to be successful for every district. And let me add one thing, is that just because your district may or may not do collaborative conferencing, I meet with almost every superintendent in the state, either both in formal and in informal settings during the course of the year. So we're there, and one of the things we're able to do is bring up member concerns of our members. So we find that a lot of superintendents now have started really opening their door to educators and their representatives. So we think that's a new thing that's happened. So I want to add that's one of the benefits of collaborative conferencing. And you don't see that because it's not covered by the news. But I think Samantha's gone on some tours with me where we visited several superintendents, and we spend, I guess, Samantha, 2-3 hours sometimes with these guys laying out things that educators tell us that they face in the classroom. So we're getting able to give it, and we're very positive in how we share information with these superintendents, and we protect our members because a lot of our members are afraid of repercussions. They don't want their names used, and I really could care less if they like me or don't like me. So we're pretty free to share information directly and forthright with them, and they're very receptive. I will say that the superintendent in Chattanooga I found to be one of the warmest, most genuine superintendents, and I did not have a relationship with him prior to meeting with him, and his concern for his educators was second to none. He was very concerned about knowing what's going on in his classroom and what his teachers think.
One other thing I could add to that, another way that our senior leadership, I think, built trust with both groups is even before our contract expired, the HR department and senior leadership got together, and some of the items in the contract, like granting teachers 3 days personal leave, something that had been added in there and negotiated with the union, the school system went ahead and accepted that as board policy and voted that in. So there were quite a few things that the school system did ahead of time, and I think it was a way to show teachers that we really do care. We want to make sure that you feel valued and taken care of by taking some of those from the contract and actually making them board policy.
Good point.
And that is another difference between collaborative conferencing and collective bargaining is the freedom that school boards have to make policies regarding some of these issues. One thing that I would add, I do member services, so I like to look at membership trends. One interesting note is that this year we've got the possibility of being on both sides of the bargaining table because our members are so diverse. we have school board members, we have administrators, we talk to superintendents, but we also have teachers. So you will see PET on both sides of the table.
And I think that's something very unique. You've not seen that in the past.
Now, and tomorrow, for example, we have some school board members coming by, and these are people who want to champion educators. They ran on the premise of serving children and working with educators, and these are people who would really, really cultivate our opinion. When you see advocacy, it is not just what occurs at the state capitol, which I would point out to you we are very active at. We tend to be very low-key, but and the other idea is that one of the things that we've talked about and Samantha is working on is a teacher bill of rights, and what we're trying to decide is how we can implement that and get that ingrained without necessarily making it a law, because that's going to affect your working conditions. One of the things, for example, teachers should be allowed to teach in a safe and environment. That is one of the things. That should be a no-brainer for most people. But when we talk to legislators, we do a lot of training with people, including we have superintendents that have joined PET. So we've been very fortunate that our message is beginning to be received very well. And again, we're focused on the preservation of public education and being the leading champion and advocate for that statewide. And we can only do that by working together, and we also understand that it does involve compromise. And that's a word that tends to be frowned on in political circles, but the truth of the matter is not one person has all of the answers, and it takes all of us working together.
All right, the next biggest question we get is, what is the timeline and what is the process for collaborative conferencing?
I'm going to let Kathy start this one because she has actually been one of the best people for doing that in her community, and then I'm going to let you go ahead and explain the law, Samantha.
Okay, as soon as the law was passed, then I think that was in 2011, and by the next, that was passed in the spring, and then by the fall or August, the HR department, our facilitator, had already contacted both PET representatives and union representatives and said, okay, we're going to have training. So that was a 3-day training that I think part of PET paid for and the union paid for, and then the school system also helped pay for subs that day so that we could take the time to go down to central office and be trained. So that was a fairly intense 3-day training where we learned how we could get along with each other, how we could attack issues, how we could tackle them, and just really work through them so that there wouldn't be any doubt left behind when we finally moved on to the next issue, that we had done everything that we could to make sure that that was productive and helpful to teachers. And after the training, then we set our meetings one a month, and everyone agreed to a specific day and a specific time. So we marked those in on our calendar for the entire year so that no one would have any conflicts. Now, sometimes we did have to change our calendar every once in a while, but everyone knew that every second Tuesday we would meet from 4 to 5:30. And then an agenda would be sent out by the facilitator, and she happened to be our HR director. The agenda was sent out to all of the members of the group, and for preview, was there anything that we wanted to add to the agenda? And that's another thing I liked about it. It was always sent out, and then if you had something that you wanted to bring to the table at that time, you contacted the facilitator, and that would be put on the agenda for the next meeting. So there's always that continuous communication that was going on with this team. So we would meet, we would discuss issues. Sometimes we didn't solve that issue with one meeting. There were times when it took 3 meetings or 4 meetings to continue to discuss and hammer out exactly the language that we wanted to use in that memorandum of understanding when the board finally voted or approved of those issues. So I think even more important than anything is the language. what you put in your memorandum of understanding with teachers and with the school system, make sure the language you have said exactly what you want to say in representing teachers. So there were times when we erased and marked out and erased and marked out numerous times before we really got that paragraph or that issue to say what we really wanted to say to protect our teachers and to take care of them. So again, meeting once a month throughout that year, and by the end of May, we had hammered out what we wanted to put in our memorandum of understanding, and that went before the school board, first reading, second reading, and then they voted to approve. And if the board voted to approve, which they did, then all the members would come together and would sign that memorandum of understanding, and then that would be what we would use for the next 3 years and continue to meet that second and third year. Anything else I need to cover there? Did I hit everything?
Did a good job. Hey, Samantha, you've got the law probably in front of you, but do you want to explain the process?
Yes, and Kathy will help me out here. To start the collaborative conferencing process, teachers have to go to the board with a specific number of signatures, 15% of teachers. It's very specific. Principals and assistant principals are considered management. Their signatures don't count. Teachers' aides, custodians, secretaries, their signatures don't count. It has to be certified staff. But those signatures have to be turned into the board by October the 1st. And we get questions all the time like, if I'm a member of PET, do I have to sign PET signature lists, or can union members and PET members and unaffiliated teachers sign and give those signatures to the board? Kathy, do you want to answer that?
In the petition that we sent out, of course, the CMCEA, the Clarksville-Montgomery County Education Association, the union sent their petition out first to get their signatures because they were the ones who were requesting the vote. So they needed to get the 15%. Now, on their survey that they sent out, they had a paragraph listed at the top of their survey to say, you do not have to be a member of any group to sign this petition. And similarly, we did the same thing. We passed around our petition and said, again, you do not have to be a PET member or a union member. You can be unaffiliated with any group to sign the petition. And we prefaced our paragraph by saying what's most important is we want to make sure all teachers sign this petition because we want all teachers to have a vote. And that makes a difference when you say all teachers and you don't have to be a member of anything.
So it's really changing how the conversation is even starting, because associations are working together to get the signatures required to get the petition to the board.
Yes.
And then once the board receives that petition, they create a collaborative conferencing committee or a special question committee.
That's correct.
By November the 1st.
Mm-hmm.
And a vote is put out.
But let me jump in there. Before the vote is taken, the special question committee meets, and it is represented by one PET member and union member, and there are 2 board members there along with the facilitator. So we met and we went over, of course we had the minutes from 3 years ago when we met the first time. And in those minutes are just the parameters, the guidelines of how we want the vote to proceed, that we have an election team set up at each school, and it is made up of administrators, 1 PET member, 1 union member, and 1 unaffiliated. And each member of that election team has a job. For instance, 1 person will be in charge of teachers, collecting teacher signatures as they come in, they sign. Another member of that team, election team, they would pass out the ballot. Another member would explain the ballot if it was necessary to explain it. And then 1 person would check the ballot to make sure that the person who was in charge of signatures had initialed the back so that it would be a valid vote, and then drop it in the ballot box. So there's an election team at each school. Those were some of the things that were in our guidelines for our special vote. Once that election team is chosen, also you had to make sure that no information, it's kind of like a regular election, a mayoral election, things like that, no information was sent out to members, to teachers on the day of election, which was violated a little bit in our school system, but we won't talk about that because it all resolved and everybody was happy at the end. But it's just to keep that from inundating teachers with make sure you go vote, vote for this, vote for that, just to keep it on the sidelines, keep it quiet, and let people make their own choice and vote during that day. So all of that is in the special election committee who meets before the vote ever takes place. And all that has to be approved. And it was approved by the special election of the vote committee during that day.
All right, now on the ballot there are 2 questions. What are those 2 questions?
The first question is, do you want the school system to participate with teachers in collaborative conferencing?
And that's a simple yes/no question.
Simple yes/no question. And the second question is, if so, then who do you want to represent you? And of course your union group is listed, PET is listed, and then the unaffiliated group is listed.
Okay, and then once those votes are calculated, to get a seat at the table, and I worked this out, this is mathematically, this makes sense. To get seats at the table, you have to have 15% of those votes as an organization, or a not organization if the vote was unaffiliated. Mm-hmm. And this works out because the panel, the conferencing group is made up of 7 to 11 of the management team, and then 7 to 11 people representing the teachers. And 15%, if you're just doing that 7 and 7, 15% is one person. And so you can't go in with half a person on the table. So that's likely where that figure came from.
Mm. Well, after the votes are tallied by the election team at each school, and they fill out their tally sheet, and then one of the administrators takes the actual ballot box and the tally sheet down to central office and turns it in that day. Ours was November 14th. We voted that day on a Friday. The ballot boxes are then collected, the votes are gone over, and then they make a tally, a final tally sheet for each school, and they list the number of votes for each organization, and then the final vote at the bottom of the page, how many votes were collected for each group, and then they notify the different groups as to how many representatives they will have at the table based on that 15%.
All right, so let's hypothetically say that the ballot came back, the vote was overwhelmingly no, they did not get the chance. When is the next time they could start the collaborative conferencing process?
The next year. Yeah.
Go ahead.
They could do the next year. You don't have to sit out. You can petition to do it every year. But if it's selected, it's in effect for 3 years.
Yes, and so that's why we had the vote this year, because 3 years ago we started the first process.
All right, let's see the next question. JC talked about this at the beginning, but it might be helpful to go back over it again. What subjects can be addressed through collaborative conferencing?
Okay. Do you want me to do that?
Well, you listed the 7 areas.
Yeah.
I can just touch on the ones that we talked about the most these past 3 years when we were working on our collaborative conferencing. The issue, more than anything, as you said, was working conditions and also grievance process. That's something that I would say the union was more concerned with than anything. And the biggest issue was representation for a teacher in any kind of meeting. They were most concerned that when a teacher was called into an administrator's office They did not want that teacher to go in by themselves. They always wanted to have a representative there. This is what took us several days to hammer out and discuss. Because they felt like there should be a representative with that teacher every time that teacher goes into the administrator's office for a meeting.
And what I would add to that, Kathy, is a couple things. Number one, I don't think you have to be afraid of meeting with administrators. And I think that's one of the things that we have to break down. I mean, you know, if you want to talk about job performance and they call you in, and it's a simple thing like, you know, particularly maybe you speak too loudly or you don't speak loudly enough or something like that. You know, just something simple like that is not a big deal. And sometimes we, by bringing representatives into this, you escalate this very quickly. Now, the downside to that is that if it takes a turn toward where it's a threat or it's a potential reprimand, which I think if Mike Shepard was on, he would clearly explain to you. We certainly believe everybody should have the right to be represented, and so we feel like that it's kind of a tough situation. Now, Samantha, you work with this every day. You know, we get calls almost daily from teachers on particular issues. Teachers will call in and say, do I have to do bus duty? And, you know, sympathetic. We had a lady last year that called in and had bus duty on her birthday. And as tragic and as bad as that was, you know, we're sorry that you had to do bus duty, but yes, ma'am, you have to do bus duty. You know, certainly if your principal knew it was your birthday, maybe he would have scheduled it at a different time or made arrangements or let you trade off with another teacher. But, you know, so some issues can be explained and are really simple. Some get pretty complex and can escalate very quickly. So, you know, but the teachers really need clarity on grievance procedures. I agree. You know, this is one of the areas that we can find common ground pretty quickly with, I think all of us can agree upon. For example, in Clarksville, Montgomery County, the right to appeal a grievance is perpetual. I think you can appeal it at any time. As I recall, we had a lady that had been reprimanded and 20 years later wanted to challenge it. You go to somewhere like Wilson County where it's 5 business days that they have to appeal. So if they get a reprimand on a Thursday, by the time you know, it's the end of the day, they tell them that counts as one day. They go on Friday. That's you know, they're debating. They're upset with that. They want to talk to somebody in our office. They need to decide when to call, but they don't want to call at the school. So they wait till they get home. They call us on Friday evening. They leave us a message. We normally call back on Saturday. We work some really strange hours. Mike Shepard, our general counsel, is usually available. He'll call them on Saturday. We check our messages regularly there. But in worst case scenario, he calls them on Monday. And by the time we've got to hurry up and get a answer to that really quick. So we have a very short turnaround. We usually want them to come in or we want to talk to them. So anyway, so we need some standardization on grievance procedures across the state. So that's a couple things that I might recommend. But certainly some of the other areas that we've talked about, you know, I mean, salary, working conditions, let's go salaries, grievance procedures, insurance. That's become a big issue in places like Hamilton County. Fringe benefits, working conditions, leave, and payroll deductions. We don't think about leave, but I think there's some things that we really need to look at in leave that we haven't addressed. We had a case in Crossville where a guy was active duty military. I mean, he was called to active duty, and he almost lost his job. And as we know, you would think federal law would prevail and keep teachers from doing that. Well, they reassigned his position. And so we spent a little bit of time trying to get the gentleman back his job, which subsequently he got his job back. And he got back the exact position he left. So leave is an issue that should, you know, we can all find mutual ground and work on. So anyway, those are a few more suggestions. So that's what can be addressed, Sam, through collaborative conferencing.
Now there are some. Sorry, go ahead.
So let me add just a couple more things about the grievance process. In having to discuss that issue, that particular issue, for so many sessions, you mentioned fear. That did come out because apparently at some schools these other teachers from the union were expressing concern that they had teachers who were fearful about going in to have a conversation with the administrator. And so the senior leadership group, which consisted of course former principals, they were quite concerned that teachers felt this way. So at their next principals meeting, more than once, they hammered this issue home and said, you should not be having such an adversarial atmosphere in your conferences with your teachers. So I think something good came out of that discussion because it brought home to light an issue that senior leadership was not aware of. So I think sometimes in talking about these areas, other offshoots come out that senior leadership may not be aware of. And I also talked to senior leadership about another issue that teachers were experiencing at other schools. And he nodded his head and said, yes, I have had that particular concern come up more than once. So that's another, I think, another advantage of this collaborative conferencing. Issues like that, discussions like that can be had, whereas in just negotiations that might have never come up.
And one more thing, Kathy, right along the same lines. What we created was a professional bargaining class. If you notice, collective bargaining folks continued to be the same people. And it was always the same issues over and over again. And what happened was, in particular, Samantha and I met this summer with a superintendent in Middle Tennessee, and he brought this up that he had been the negotiator for 20-something years, and he was always on the other side, and he said it never changed. And he said we never got to move forward on issues. And I think with with collaborative conferencing instead of collective bargaining, what we're able to do is we're able to bring fresh voices and fresh people. And one of the things that we will do, and we've done this, is that we've been able to make sure that the people that we have representing our members at the districts is not always the same people. If we want a fresh change, we talk about that, and so it's a opportunity for us, and we share and we talk with them. But we also want to make sure that we understand that education is local, and that the people at the ground level, at the local level, and that are teaching in school systems understand that school system much better than somebody sitting in Nashville, Tennessee, or in the case of the union in Washington, D.C.
Well, and also you mentioning fresh faces, there will probably be some new people on the panel or the team this coming session. So that brings up a question of, okay, the original group was trained. Now, what are we going to do with those new people on the team? Are we going to have the training again with some of us who've already gone through it? And what are we going to do with those people who have not been trained? And that's an issue that our HR director and I, our facilitator and I have talked about. So maybe that's something that we need to keep in mind as we continue to go through this process of what are we going to do this next time for training.
Yeah, and the things that this is exactly why we're doing the webinar today. We realized that the bottom line was when this initially passed, and this is something that educators should know, that when this originally passed, it had some funding component piece to that. And TOS was supposed to, TOS is the Tennessee Organization for School Superintendents, and TOS was supposed to carry out the training. And it was a neutral ground, and the school boards were to come together along with the superintendents and with the teacher organizations. And we met first with that. We've all undergone training. We met together here in Nashville. It was we had our general counsel at the event. We had PET representatives at the event. The Tennessee Education Association was at the event. TOS was at the event. TSBA was at the event. And Williamson County, which is the only member not a member of TSBA, was also at the event. So all of us were there, and we hammered out the rules, the policies, and the processes for how this would work. The downside to that, and that is available on our website, Samantha, as I recall, and all the training as we went into that. And you're exactly right. What's going to happen is that it has not been ongoing because they took it out of the budget and they've not funded it. And it was very low priority for them to fund this. I think that they need to spend a little bit of money and at least make it available online on a regular basis, whether the four major groups, let's just be real honest, it's Professional Educators of Tennessee, TOS, TSBA, and the union. If the four groups would get together and work and do a common thing, it only benefits all of us. And that should be one of our objectives. I don't think anybody would oppose that, to be honest with you. I just think it's a matter of we haven't made it a priority.
All right, one of the last questions we get, it might be a matter of semantics. What is the difference between a collective bargaining agreement, a contract, and a memorandum of understanding?
Well, with a collective bargaining agreement, it's binding, although they don't have binding arbitration, which means basically it's a set of rules that they've agreed to abide by. A contract can be entered into by any group of people, and any two persons can enter into a contract. Teacher has a contract normally, and it's ongoing, and we don't see that a lot. But when you first are hired, these are the expectations we expect of our educators, and in lieu of, here's what we provide for you, blah, 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 and they lay that out. And then a memorandum of understanding is a lot like a agreement with the caveat that it is not, and anybody can enter into a memorandum of understanding. We've actually thought about doing memorandums of understanding with every school district and say, here's how we'll work with you and all that. But the problem with that is now that we're up to about 145, 146 school systems, and they have to constantly, you'd have to stay on top of each school district policies, you'd have to adhere to that. There's no standardization, so it almost require 130 or 146 different renewals every year, because as they change. I mean, for example, in Cheatham County this week, they're doing some tweaking to the grievance procedures. Hamilton County is doing some things to grievance procedures this week, and they're changing, or it's up on their board agenda for tonight, in fact. And so those things will change. And so what we've got to do is, but I think there's some basic tenets that we can reach with them. And most of the times when I talk to superintendents, they're real simple. They say, come in and see me, let's work this out. I'll give kudos to Metro Nashville Public Schools. Not always the friendliest or easiest to navigate, but we met with them, and we went in, we laid out a list of problems that were going on in their school system, and for the most part they corrected the issues that we brought to them because they were genuine. They knew we weren't coming with them with issues that were not relevant. So.
And just talking about the differences among the three, the collective bargaining agreement, the contract, and memorandum of understanding. I like the title, Memorandum of Understanding, because I think it just sends a message of cooperation. And I think the main thing is, I know in some of our school systems the contract is about to run out, or it has, and those school systems are not interested in trying to pursue PECCA to the extent of the law to how it should be. We've already heard from other school systems that that's just not happening. I think the main thing we have to do is we have to educate our superintendents, our directors of schools, and just let them know that this is a positive thing. This is a positive step toward getting teachers to know they're valued and how important they are. And I think that will attract your quality teachers to your school system. And that's something that our school system focuses on more than anything, is they took an initiative of, they were proactive in getting us a salary raise this year. And of course, we know we did not get one from the state. but they were very much interested in providing salary raises for our teachers. And I think that says so much for a school system that we value our teachers. We want to attract the best. And not only attract the best, but we want to keep the best. I think all of that focuses around the PECCA law and the Memorandum of Understanding.
Good point. And then finally, I would just say to you, Samantha, and to the folks, that what we're seeing is the opportunity. I think the other thing I would say is that the union initially did not want to embrace collaborative conferencing. They like collective bargaining. But I'm beginning to see statewide they're starting to embrace it as well. And of course, we've always embraced it because, again, as we go back to say that everybody, the more voices at the table, the better for our educators. And so we think that now that they're seeing what's going on, I think that they're beginning to embrace it as well. So it's going to be it's a gradual process. In 20 years, we won't even be thinking about it. And hopefully teachers will see the benefit that we've done and laid the groundwork on this right now.
Well said. And more than anything, JC, it's your tireless work with the legislators and trying to get people to come on board with this. I think that's said more for educators and for teachers than anything that's ever been done in the state of Tennessee, quite frankly.
Thank you.
All right, the very last question we get is, how does PECCA affect board policy? And I really think Kathy already addressed it earlier when she said that the board was proactive in making changes that they saw coming up.
Well, and just to talk about our school board, of course, I go to all the board work sessions because that's the meat of the session. That's where you get to hear all the discussions. The formal board meetings, they just vote on it. But when you go to the board work sessions, you get to really see how the board works. And the board is very much dependent on your senior leadership because they're out there every day. They're working with teachers. They're working with programs. They're working with children. They're seeing what works. And they bring all that information back to the school board members. And the school board members depend on our senior leadership to make sure that they are educated on what's happening in our school system. So when our facilitator, HR director, comes before the school board and says, this is what our collaborative conferencing team has come up with. We've worked on this for many months. We've hammered out what we think is going to be the most beneficial and effective for teachers. They pretty much trust their senior leadership. I mean, they'll ask questions, but they know that senior leadership is what brings the most important information to them. So that when it finally comes time for a vote, there's usually not a lot of discussion among the school board members because they know we've done our homework and we've done our work well.
That's well done. And again, advocacy is not just what occurs at the state capitol. You know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what happens at the White House. It doesn't matter what happens at the State House. What matters the most is what happens at your house. And really where we've pushed and where we've made a shift in our policies is what we've started really doing is advocating for our members with superintendents and school board members. And we do it at a different level than we've ever done it in the past. And you know, and so we hope, and in fact, there's a few school board members that are, I think, on this collaborative conferencing webinar right now. But what we're seeing is that, and that doesn't mean we don't advocate at the State House. I had a couple meetings this week thus far with some legislators already who are doing the work. So again, it's going to affect your board policy. And what we're working on is standardizing some of those things. And when we ask teachers questions, undoubtedly, believe it or not, we take what our members tell us and we enact it and try to make it into policy. And so they're going to do the same thing at the local level. When they hear from you guys with a unified voice, they're going to try to enact that and make that the law. So I know we've gone a long time and apologize for being so long.
We went just the right amount, and there are no questions. I I would love to answer some audience questions, but I don't have any. So we must have done a really great job.
Hey, what can we say? We're educators.
I know. If you have any questions, you are always welcome to email us at advocacy@proedtn.org, or you can email JC or I. Mine is samantha.bates@proedtn.org. If there are no final thoughts, Kathy, do you have anything?
No final thoughts, just well done on putting this together, and I think the questions that you posed were right on target, and I hope that we took those questions and put just the right amount of information in there for anyone who tunes into the webinar later on in the coming months, that they can take this information and use it in their school system to get collaborative conferencing started where they are.
Absolutely, and I wish I could take credit for these questions, but I mean, these are just questions that our members have.
Once again, true educators.
We just listen. That's what it is. JC, any last thoughts?
No, I appreciate everybody's time and spending on this, and again, we just want to work together for the benefit of all educators and for the children of the state. Simple philosophy, simple policies, and we need you educators to tell us what you need, and we'll try to work to make it happen.
All right. Thank you so much, President Kathy. Thank you so much, Executive Director J.C. Bowman. And everyone out there, have a great night.